Okay, I wanted to shoot this video as an update to the last video where I provide motivation for why you would want to study macroeconomics given the things that are going on. Now, uh, you could tell that that video was shot last year because my hair was much shorter, but also some of the data or some of the things I was saying really pertain to what was going on a year ago. A year ago, there was a lot of questions about what was going on with the pandemic and what the effects on the economy or what effects on the economy it would have. And so I don't want to say that we have answers to those questions, but I do want to update you a bit on what's happened since then. Okay, so I call this motivation, what a difference a year makes. And again, I don't just mean in terms of the length of my hair, although we'll see that in fact, a lot of things have not changed. Okay, so let's start with government spending and inflation. So I mentioned that this was something we might talk about or something we might think about, right? That, oh, governments are now spending a lot because of the pandemic. And what does that mean for inflation? What does it mean for the economy? Is a big question. And it's an even bigger question now if you look at the numbers. So here's the federal budget deficit in Canada. Okay, these light blue lines are projections that take into account the 2021 federal budget that was just released in April. So you can see here, look at the budget deficit for 2021. It's huge. It's almost unheard of. It's crazy. Look at that. Compared to 2009, 2010, well, it's what, 5 times the size? It's huge. And it doesn't go back to normal anytime soon per se, right? In 2022, it's still going to be a very large deficit. You can see that it continues like this. So in this sense, I mean, this is still a big question. And in fact, is probably a bigger question than it was a year ago. And what about the US? I don't have a good graph for you, but you could do a very similar graph. The Biden agenda has these three major pillars of expenditure. So there was the American Rescue Act, which was passed already, which was $1.9 trillion. And now there are two other acts which the Biden administration is going to try to pass. The American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. So these have spending for things like infrastructure, various social programs and so on. You can see the details. But importantly, the size of the spending is huge. Huge. So to give you an idea, we're talking here about the American Rescue Act itself was $2 trillion. US GDP in this year was $21.4 trillion. So this is almost a tenth the size of the US economy. Again, absolutely unheard of. And if you compare it to the stimulus that happened in 2008, 2009, 2010, the Obama stimulus here, okay, to address the Great Recession, it's way bigger. Again, just the American Rescue Act, which is $2 trillion, is way bigger than $787 billion for the Obama stimulus. Okay, so here's Obama, looking at Biden and wondering if this is a great idea. Anyways, very interesting to see what the results will be. And in this course, we'll provide some theories about what the result will be. I'm not going to claim that they're the only theory or that they're the right theory, but we'll see some theories about what this could mean. And what does it mean for inflation? Well, again, this is an ongoing debate. And it's even more heated now than it was a year ago. So Larry Summers, I don't know if you know him. He's an economist. He was for a while the president of Harvard. I think he was the Treasury Secretary under Clinton for a while. Larry Summers has come out and said, so this is a direct quote here, "I'm concerned what is being done is substantially excessive." He says all this spending could lead to inflation, could lead to large amounts of inflation. And who disagrees with them? Well, many people, but one of them is Janet Yellen. Now, here's another important update that I need to make. In last year's video, I talked about Janet Yellen as being the former Fed chair. Now, not only is she the former Fed chair, she is also the Secretary of Treasury. So there's someone who's doing very well for herself. And here's a quote from her: "I strongly doubt the relief spending will stoke inflation pressure." So this is an ongoing debate. Is all this spending going to be inflationary? What's it going to do? Very interesting. I also talked last year about central bank actions. And so I can preface this by saying they're still big, still huge, huge actions by the central bank. So here's the balance sheet of the Bank of Canada. Now, I should point out, I didn't say this specifically last year, but when I talk about the balance sheet of a central bank, this is the assets they hold. How do they buy those assets? Usually by printing money. Okay, printing money, but with newly created purchasing power, that's how they buy this. So if they're expanding their balance sheet by buying a lot of assets, they're doing it by creating a lot of money to do it. So what happened to the central bank's balance sheet, to the Bank of Canada's balance sheet? Well, if anything, it's just become higher since I last talked about it. Okay, it kind of plateaued for a bit, and it's starting to go down. So here we have a recent Bloomberg article talking about Bank of Canada becomes first to signal exit from stimulus. So they're going to start decreasing the size of their balance sheet. But again, just unheard of activity by central banks to increase the money supply, to increase their balance sheet like this. This is unheard of, and it's still happening. Same thing with the Federal Reserve. I don't think I had a graph for you guys last year about what happened to the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, but this is the equivalent. So this is showing the assets, total assets held by the Federal Reserve. And so you can see that since the pandemic, it's just shot up and it hasn't gone down. Okay, it's a huge increase. Now, I also talked about the shape of the recovery. What shape was the recovery going to take? So maybe we have some answers to this. And so I subtitled this V-ish. It's kind of a V-shaped recovery. So here's what I mean. Here's real GDP for the United States. So you can see it took this huge dive, shot back up, and then is kind of going back to where it was. But here you can see it hasn't attained its old peak. But also you can see that you might not want to compare it to the old peak. You might want to compare it to where it would have been. Where it would have been had growth continued here. If you want to continue that trend of the growth, that might be more interesting. And you can see that it's nowhere close to being where it would have been had this growth continued. So it's V-ish. There was a sharp rebound, but it's not quite back to where it would have been had there been no recession. And same thing in Canada. Here's real GDP, Canadian real GDP. Again, drops down substantially, shoots back up, and then grows a little bit more slowly, not quite attaining its previous peak. And what about, is the US, I put US here, I couldn't find the data for Canada in time, but is the US recovery K-shaped? So that was another shape that people have said, K-shaped, meaning that the recovery is quick for some individuals, that's the top of the K, and slow for some individuals, or it goes down for some individuals. Some people's income, does not grow quickly. That's what they mean by K-shaped. So here I have three groups divided by income or by wage, and you can see what's happened to their incomes since the pandemic here. Okay. And so you can see that it's generally recovered for the highest income individuals, but the same cannot be said for the lowest income individuals who have not reattained their peak. So, these are people working in the service sector. Those are often low-wage jobs, and they have not been able to recover in the same way that high-wage jobs, which tend to, you can easily work at home. You think about lawyers and bankers and so on. These people, because they can work at home, recovered pretty quickly. They've more or less reattained their old level. Okay, but the same is not true of these lower wage. So this is the K-shaped recovery, it's called. Anyways, that's my short update for you guys. I hope you found it interesting. And I recommend you all read the news and keep up with these things because they're really neat. So, best of luck with that.